Surprise, shorty. You thought you were coming in for the single review, but you were wrong. It was all for the clickbait views. It is, in fact, a double review today, a double whammy of Dune and Halloween Kills, both atrocious in their own way, and both need to be covered in a speedy fashion, so I'll get right down to it. As stated previously, I don't like that it's only convenient for me to make reviews when films are either really good or really bad. I wish these films were okay or mediocre in some way, but they are not. They are some of the worst films I've seen in now a steady line of really bad films I've seen in the theater, and I hope they are the bookend of that, because if I see any more films this year that are in fact worse than these, I may just stop watching movies altogether. I'll start with Dune because it was the first film I saw. I saw it on Thursday night with a group of friends, and I found this to be an embarrassing piece of filmmaking, only made more embarrassing by the people who will defend it as something special. Although defending it as passable is, in my opinion, laughable enough, but people have highly regarded this film on both Letterboxd and Rotten Tomatoes, which is all the more confusing to me because I find that on nearly every front, Dune is a horrible, horrible miscalculation, even in its visuals. Though commendable for certainly having an identity and certainly being Dune's strongest asset, is still undermined, whether that be in the identity itself being rather lifeless and not being particularly fun to look at, but also in the baffling effects. For so much focus on some of the effects in the film, a lot of them really stick out as sore thumbs because of how bad they are in comparison to others, such as the shielding. It looked dire in the first trailer, and it remains so, making action impossible to follow and taking away any real clarity from the fight scenes. I'm surprised that a lot of people who are so adamant about action and visual clarity in films have not attacked this, because Dune is nearly impossible to follow in any of its variety of sword fights, which should be a point of excitement for the film. I also think that Villeneuve is just too enamored with the visuals themselves. Like in 2049, he lets the camera linger on for far too long, adding unnecessary minutes onto an already arduous ride with incredibly sparse plotting. Dune's plot consists of Paul and his mother going from point A to point B, constantly on the run with not a single tender or impactful moment shared between them. Characterization is sacrificed for a digestible length, but that is exactly the problem. Too much is sacrificed in order to adapt the film to the big screen. I think Dune is a story where it would have been more commendable to just bring this into a mini-series and not try and go for the silver screen, because in compressing all of Dune's pages, all of the dense content in the book and trying to bring it down to these moments, you have decisions and moments that have far-reaching consequences for the future, but are also important for the film itself, come out of seemingly nowhere, such as the Doctor's momentous decision. It is built up in the book very purposefully. It is a slow burn that allows readers to understand the motives of even the smallest players. But crucial plot moments like that are rushed upon the viewer. They come out of thin air and lack total emotional punch, and I'm shocked that people who didn't read the book even understood what was going on because of how little we understood about characters and their motivations before they did crucial things. Now, I'm not a big stickler for adaptation and trying to capture a book one for one. I think it's way more important for a film to stand on its own and be good in its own merit and have a distinct identity, such as with The Shining. However, I think that in translating certain things poorly, you can have near objective flaws that, no matter the means of things getting lost in translation, certain qualities are just bad. And I think that this happens with Dune. Like the nuanced politics of the spice. In the book, the politics of spice and intergalactic conquest and different political clans trying to outmaneuver each other, it is boiled down to a redundant colonialist narrative that makes the film into Avatar 2.0 from a thematic perspective. This was really came early in the form of Zendaya's monologue. And Zendaya opens the book and she recontextualizes the story into a simple narrative of imperialism, and that is not what Dune is about. It certainly has certain imperial elements to it, but to have her open this film and try and make it exclusively about that, I think really oversimplifies what Frank Herbert was going for. But there are other glaring flaws apart from unfaithfulness that stick out way worse and matter way more. The acting is incredibly muted and lifeless. It's not as though any actor has any time to actually develop their character, but it is worth saying that I found a lot of these performances to be one note and, dare I say, committing plagiarism against other blockbuster films. It truly felt as though that people like Josh Brolin and Jason Momoa were trying to go beat for beat, one for one, with other narratives and other blockbusters that I saw. Like Jason Momoa's character, particularly the moment where he's like, "Ah, my boy," to Timothy Chalamet and patting him on the back. These characters are, again, nuanced in the book, and they don't come off as these super simplistic caricatures of the macho men that you see on the screen, and I just found this to be very weird, and I can't perfectly articulate it, but I felt as though that I had seen like exact gestures and moments copied from other films. It is definitely the least formed part of my criticism, but it's something that stuck out to me incredibly sharply. Villeneuve is overall, though, and I think that this is, definitely on him and the screenwriters, they're just overall more concerned with repetitive sound cues and the dream sequences and the shots of ships than they are in the characters themselves, which is, of course, a massive problem. When you have a character and their entire motivations are based around another character, for instance, Paul is the protagonist, and he bases all of his motivations and his pride and essential parts to his character around his father, and his father has all of like 3 scenes before he is carted away from Paul. That is a massive problem, and I am so disappointed that the overwhelming majority of film audiences don't see this as an intrinsic flaw with the narrative of Dune. That Paul's motivations are built around his father, and his father is barely there, and you have no sense of the love or respect between father and son, and instead you just have pictures of sandworms and the burrs and the buzzes that again are repetitive in and of themselves of Blade Runner 2049's sound design. And that's not even mentioning that the sound design in this film is horribly mixed. The background noises dominate the voices of the actors, particularly Rebecca Ferguson. I don't know why. No one talked about how quiet her voice was, and it made for an incredibly distracting experience. But in all these comparisons to Blade Runner 2049, I also just would like to say that 2049 is way better than this because it has a mystique quality to it, and I felt as though that the mystery behind it of this idea of the replicants and the humans actually carried a lot of its slowness and justified it. But Dune has nearly nothing going for it. It completely misses the whimsy, fun, and pacing that make Lord of the Rings and Star Wars such wonderful pieces of blockbuster fiction, and it also doesn't have the balls to go over the 3 hours to fully realize this ensemble and truly make this the audacious project it was supposed to be. It represents the moribund of the blockbuster, how truly trite, unsatisfying, and depressing they can be sometimes. And if Tenet and Dune are the best the auteurs of the theater can offer, well, not only will the industry be crippled, but it honestly flat out deserves to be when people on streaming are creating some of the most incredible, complex narratives the industry or anyone has ever seen before. When you have stuff on that being produced on HBO Max and Netflix, and that being exclusives to those platforms, and you have this shit getting promoted in the movies, well, that is going to create a problem. Dune is a hollow, boring watch that feels like it is burdened with endless setup and endless expositional dialogue, only to insult viewers with the worst traits of the director coming to life, his worst tendencies, and absolutely leaving to the wayside the intelligence of the source material. And I'm already over the amount of time I want to spend on this, but I would also like to point out that even if you argue Dune as a source of spectacle, I cannot even argue, I must stress that the action of Dune itself is extremely disappointing, not only for just the confusion of the hand-to-hand fistfights, but also the battles. The fall of the House of Atreides is supposed to be a monumental part of the book, and yet it is mitigated to a 5-minute sequence here that has no business being that small or that dark. It reminded me of the Game of Thrones final battle, or at least one of the final battles, and it could have been just illustrated in a much more vivid and compelling way, and it was chosen not to be. There is no sense of grandeur to this movie, and I hate it very, very much. It is Villeneuve's worst by a long shot, and it is an overall saddening watch for such a seemingly audacious project. I'm giving Dune a 1.5 out of 5. Then I saw Halloween Kills the night after with my family, and I found it to be similarly quite atrocious. But I did have fun with the film, partially because of my family just being there and the comedic elements of it just being so terrible that it is in fact kind of good, but also because Halloween Kills does have some redeeming qualities. Really just one redeeming quality, but I digress. When Michael Myers is actually killing people, when you actually get the enjoyment of him killing people. The gore and the violence is shocking, it is repulsive in its own way, and it is also enjoyable in its own right. And I thought that the original Halloween, which I talked about a couple of years ago in my review, did this incredibly well. And I think that Halloween Kills, again, captures the violence of the slasher film extremely well. The problem is it has so many moments in which it is not about the violence and is about utter nonsense. What I thought made Halloween 2018 such a good movie was, yes, how it was kind of meta and how it addressed Mike Myers and the slasher villain in general, but also because it made its story about a very particular character and idea, and that was about the bitter rivalry that is developed for decades on end between Laurie and Mike, and how it has thus affected Laurie's family. And so what does Halloween Kills do? It takes the strongest piece of its predecessor and purposely fucking ignores it. It purposely takes away focus from the internal conflict of Laurie and her family and these women and the last the final girl that comes in so many of these horror movies, and completely ignores that for a story that is about a whole town and how it deals with Mike Myers, which quite frankly makes no sense and does a lot of damaging things. It first off makes this an ensemble film for some reason, even though it doesn't have the length to build any of its characters up in decent regards. It also makes for an incredibly confusing thematic movie. People have commonly confused some of these Halloween remakes with auteurism, and I fear that this may be the case with this as well. Please don't do that, because this is just bad writing. It is not trying to be political in any way, but it's trying to say something about mob rule and mob violence and how the public is corrupted by individual agents of evil, and it's just a confusing thing to include. I think it is just executed very poorly, with the contrast that the film takes itself at some points so very seriously, and then it has characters repeat "evil dies tonight" over and over and over again, despite being not self-aware about itself in the slightest fashion. It is so comically unaware of how this is going to be not the final night for Michael Myers, and yet makes these grandiose, bold statements on morality and evil and agency when it has no right to do so. Whether or not you liked Halloween 2018, I think most people would reasonably agree that the main aspect of that film was Laurie's relationship to Michael and the legacy between those two characters. And so to flat out ignore that is, in my opinion, the worst thing a sequel can do. I have a very stringent philosophy that sequels should be about either building upon or subverting the narrative tenets of the original film. Ignoring those tenets altogether is the worst thing that a film can do. This is a point I made in my Last of Us Part 2 video, and it's what makes Halloween Kills such a horrible sequel for me. Now, there are, of course, other aspects at play. I don't think there's a lot to say about the film, because it is either fun in its violence, senseless though it may be, or it's just really poorly written in some instances, with lines of dialogue delivered with the utmost seriousness when they have no reason to be serious at all, because they're, of course, comical messes. The evil dies tonight, literally, what the hell? You really just, if anyone behind the scenes, I hope someone was aware of how stupid that line sounded, and I just wish that someone somewhere realized that it should have been more obvious that we should have been laughing with the film than laughing at it, because at how it stands right now, it feels as though that I'm just laughing at the film, and it takes itself way too serious with the way it is shot and edited and the way that Jamie Lee Curtis acts. I mean, it's like Macbeth at some points with its deathly seriousness, and it quite frankly makes no sense. But yeah, the fact that I was laughing at the film mixed with the scenes of violence that I enjoyed made this not only a more fun film than Dune, but in my opinion, a better one, although very, very slightly. I would give Halloween Kills a 2 out of 5, although the number difference is not that great when you look at Dune and Halloween Kills side by side. They are both atrocious, and this marks, again, one of the worst stretches of theater experiences I've gone through. I mean, these two films, coupled with The Suicide Squad and Old and A Quiet Place Part 2 and Wonder Woman and Tenet, I mean, good lord, it has been a hot minute since I've seen a good film in the theater, but luckily that should be changing soon, and I look forward to talking about more, hopefully better films next time.